reiterate any of this stuff for anyone that's stopping by, but I figured we would just jump into it and people can kind of get caught up as we go. So if none of you are familiar, this is the render that we're going to kind of be covering, the evolution of it, some of the technical stuff that I learned while I was trying to make it. And this originally just kind of was born out of like a random idea. I was myself last year trying to like figure out better ways to do volumetrics in Octane inside of Cinema. And before I could get like foggy rooms or I could do VDBs, but it was, you know, this kind of like hard edge coming out of like light sources was something that I was like super not familiar with how to achieve that at the time. And so this was just I did a couple of these cars because like of the headlights and like, you know, some of the interiors, and they're definitely not realistic cars. I mean, they look decent because that's kind of what Octane just gives you out of the box with, you know, good GI and everything. But it was more just figuring out, I mean, they made a nice composition, but the whole thing was sort of just getting familiar with Octane's way of dealing with volumetrics. And then, you know, after that, I realized how slow it was inside of Octane. Looked great, but it's just like this took hours to get like, and it's still a bunch of grain inside of here. I only have two 1080 Ti's that I'm running, and I mean that's like a lot, but still Octane takes quite a bit to clean up all of this stuff. So for the animation side of it, which is just this guy here, so I changed it up to be kind of a little bit more of like a cinematic framing versus a still. And so this is all done inside of Redshift, and there's like a big kind of tone shift. This is a lot more like stylized and like punchy. For this one I went like a little bit more realistic, and like film-esque was kind of the thing I was chasing here. And the other big side of this was the smoke sim that I did in Houdini, which is just this guy right here. So I mean, it was pretty basic. The smoke sim side, if anyone's like curious, I may do a later stream on it, but it's just like a plane that has a noise pattern animating to kind of break up where the emission is, and like turbulence, and then like an upres right after it node. Hey, yo, thanks for the follow. Also, these are something I did this week was these weird GIFs, just like from Cinema's viewport of like different primitives. And I set it up so that they work. That was a fun thing that I was testing out. Instead of the nice like clean graphic, they're just like a little bit goofier. But thank you for the follow. Yeah, so what we're going to be covering is this one and the After Effects comp that kind of went into this, and faking all of these like headlights, and kind of the technical stuff behind rendering volumes here in Redshift versus here in Octane. I'm gonna turn this down again. It's still very loud in my ear. There we go. So yeah, so this is the scene inside of Cinema and Octane. There's just the two cars. I mean, there's like nothing else really in the scene except for these walls. And these were put in place just because at the time, with the just infinite fall off, it was a little bit hard to get some bounce light from my lights on the car and stuff to come back with the GI. So I just put up some fake walls, thinking that like if I had to shoot this like with a camera, we would probably go, I mean, if we couldn't do it outside because like the cars are hanging, we would probably be doing it in like a warehouse or like an airplane hangar. So that's kind of the reason for like just these back little planes here. Super easy. And then the cars were something I got for this one, this render, off of I think like archive3d.net or like free 3d, some free site. I don't exactly remember which one. And they were like the cleanest topology I could get for like a free model. I don't normally for personal projects buy a lot of my models. I just like scour the internet for like something that is like usable. But Cinema definitely has in its content browser like very decent, I mean, maybe not this like stylized of like an older vintage car, but like they have usable ones. And I wonder if we just like look really quick, just get a car, a bunch of cartons. Yeah, okay, so not the sexiest of cars, but we could definitely use one of those, or you could use one of those if you're like looking to just get something going really fast and not have to like deal with anything. Hey, what's going on? Vegan Nuts. I wonder if that's how you would say that username. I moved the chat to something where I can like look a little bit easier at it. But hey, what's going on? We're just getting started here. So that's I mean the models and everything. If just NF, we can look at the wireframe of it, and I mean that's like decent. It's all broken out into and not organized by me at all. I mean, I went through just for my texturing to like grab a couple pieces that I knew, but it had all these selections, so it was super easy. And it had like enough detail up here for like the headlights, nothing really there. And I didn't really even go into much like making each texture. Like you can see down here, they're all just like generalizations. Like the tires are an approximation of rubber. Like if we jump in there, index is just like an approximation 1.3, and then roughness is like 0.3. There's no like maps in any of this because I didn't really think of it as like a project. It was more of a technical exercise for rendering the volumetric like fog, and so I wasn't like, none of this was really textured and anything crazy, but it's oddly enough like something that most people are like, oh yeah, I know you make that like car render. And I was like, yeah, definitely. It was like made in a night. Like I did this in like 2 hours, but people really like it. I mean, I liked it at the time and I thought it was cool, but I never thought that people would think it's like that interesting. Ooh. What's up, Olaf? Apparently the bot doesn't want you posting links. Weird. I don't know what you were trying to post. Weird. Nightbot timed out for 5 seconds. Reason: stop posting links. Automated by Nightbot. Maybe I'll change that so the Nightbot allows links, because that's weird. I don't know why I would scream at you for that. 1 second. Yeah, just gonna adjust. Links are enabled. I'm gonna just get rid of these things. Okay, now you should be able to post links. I don't know why I was upset about that. Yeah, that's another thing I took from you, John. John Coons, which does really great. Weird, you can't post links. Yeah, you should be able to now. I installed, after watching his stream, I installed, yeah, it is automatically set up. I installed like a bot moderator just to like do certain tasks, and by default it wants to yell at everyone for posting links. So I turned that off. So you should be able to now. We'll see how long that takes for it to update. But you should be able to post links now. Sorry about that, Olaf. It's funny that it just like screams at you right away. Yeah, so that's a mod thing that I added, trying to up my chat game with like reminders and different things, and it's apparently aggressive against links. But yeah, material wise, I mean, nothing in here is like crazy. I mean, I feel like even these are just like out of the gate, you know, default metallic texture with like GGX. This was also built when I was using Octane more in 2019, so I updated to the new subscription model, the new everything. Oh, weird, if it's still not letting you. Okay, yeah. Search wirewheels.com, because I did say it as a word, to get great free car models. That's awesome too. Yeah, I just pulled it. Sweet, cool. The links are working now. I'm gonna see if I can pull that up. Whoa, yeah, these look sick. These are way cooler. Can you imagine a floating SJ Speedster or a Mustang? That's essentially, yeah, just go here and get this guy. That's crazy that these are free. That is a... I think I've seen this in a bunch of people's renders now that you actually mention it. I'm pretty sure I've seen this car all over the place. That's very cool. And probably way more detailed than what I have in here. It's got like the logos and everything. Yeah, go grab this. I'll add this to like a text doc of this collected scene that I'm going to put up later. And yeah, cool. Thank you, Olaf, for that. Yeah, that's definitely a good resource. But yeah, I built this last year in 2019, and now converting it and figuring out all the weird quirks with the new 2020 build of Octane was definitely a jump. And I had to like make sure that all of my weird like workarounds that I was doing back then like converted properly. Hey, thank you for the follow, Pukatso. Wonder if that's how you would ever say that, but thank you for the follow. Yeah, built those really quick, like in an afternoon. Built those like little GIFs, just like generic Cinema 4D. So like I don't think the other ones are like things you can do yet, like subscribe or anything, but those I've also built out. Yeah, so built in 2019, converted now last night because some of the stuff wasn't working. But you'll be surprised at how generically built this scene is. I feel kind of bad because like maybe people are coming here for like actual like automotive like know-how and rendering, and like there's definitely more stuff you can do, and we'll get more into it in the Redshift version where I spent like a tad bit more time with my textures. But in this one, it's all default. Like the headlights in this one, I'm gonna turn off our guy there. We just kind of start looking at it. So without any of the environment, this is the default, and it looks really gross. But that's just because like we're getting a white sky. If we move all the way out here, yeah, it's getting a white sky, and this is our whole scene. We have a little light up here, which is shooting. If we look in the render, it's shooting up here, just to like add a little bit of like highlight on the back of it. That's what that guy's doing. But all of the lights, like they don't have any amount of information on them. They are pure just black bodies. And that's one of the great things I love about Octane, is that it's textured black light or black body emissions by default work inside of the volumetrics a bit like slowly, but they do. Whereas when I went to do this in Redshift, there's not a great like default way. Like if you have emission coming from a texture in Redshift, it will not be able to work in the volumetrics, because for lights to work with volumetrics, you have to give them their own like percentage amount that they're going to influence it. So that was kind of a bummer, but I'll go over kind of the workaround for that. But let me get caught up here. Lee Griggs, yes, okay, yeah, that's definitely where I saw it. Yeah, he has been posting some crazy Arnold stuff. He's the Arnold guy, isn't he? Hey, if generic can get that much attention, great result. Don't feel bad about it. Yeah, it's funny. There's always that weird like kind of artist Instagram rule where it's like if you kind of do it quickly and don't care too much about it, but it's like a okay concept, people will love it way more than the thing you've like slaved like 2 months over. So just don't do it for likes, just do it for fun stuff, and people will like what they like. I wonder what this banding that's happening. I wonder if I can figure out why that's happening. Yeah. It seems to be fine. It's just a weird artifact of like gradient. Wonder if it's my coherent ratio. It doesn't look like it, but it could be. Yeah, so this is our default scene. You can tell that in the render it looks a lot more like a car's like paint due to kind of the graininess of it and everything, but it's all pretty much just aluminum. Everything is super metallic. Then there's just like, and I just did that so that it would really pick up all the very small amount of lights that are in the scene, because like to get through the fog, it was kind of losing the light because of the energy that was like being lost, getting caught inside the scatter, which it was supposed to be doing. So that's like, you know, it's physically accurate, but to get some of these highlights still through the fog, like up here and everything, I just had to make the car way shinier than, you know, it would be in a normal scenario. Then just rubber on the tires to break that up. I think all of the interior as well is just like essentially this plastic, you know, just 1.4, and then you know, just a sprinkling of roughness to kind of make like the illusion of leather. But even inside there, all that stuff is like super low poly, but it's kind of just the illusion of what an interior of a car would be. Lighting wise, yeah, so there's this up top guy who's like the only real like external light source, because I wanted a lot of it just to be sort of driven from the cars, and the cars like tail lights and headlights and interior light. So he's like the only one really doing anything there. I'm just gonna make another environment, HDRI environment, just so we can kind of, yeah, so this is without any fog or anything. This is just the scene lit by itself, and it's kind of insane that there is no real like GI happening. Like all of the GI that's feeding information into like shading the car here and everything is all just due to the fact that it's scattered. This top guy right here is just kind of feeding information right at the back there, and also like kind of painting with light was the idea of this one, is like if I could just like position different lights everywhere. Oh yeah, Olaf was just texting me because the moderator yelled at him. Thanks for that. So this is kind of crazy to me that this is like the default lighting of the scene. The floor I added you know, a little bit of roughness to, just because I thought it was like super interesting to have this like super blurred out, like stretched infinite floor going on. And that's the only kind of texturing that happened there. These guys don't even have a texture, so that they're just like Octane's default white, but there's so little light in the scene you can't really see that. So we're gonna click into the environment. I'm just gonna load this up, and you can see right away why I did not animate inside of Octane. It's because it was so slow. It took so long. It looked great. It was awesome once it finally cleaned up, but my goodness, did it take forever to clean up. So you can see what that light's doing up there. I just wanted kind of a little bit of information versus them just floating in darkness. And kind of like what I was saying is they're not nearly as bright as these headlights, but the tail lights just through the black body emission are able to contribute to the volumes. I'm just gonna let it go for like a little bit more. And this is what I was saying here. You can start to see it coming through. Maybe you can't in the stream. Maybe it's too compressed. But there's like information now being there because it's capturing from these light sources and scattering it out and influencing like the side lighting of these vehicles, which is kind of crazy that it's physically accurate. I mean, to a point. So I'm gonna pause it there and just kind of go into what everyone wants to know is the volumetric settings. These I had to like double check because they definitely updated in Octane 2020, which I am not as well versed in. I know that they added a bunch of features like AI lights and different things to speed up this, so this is definitely from a 2019 perspective of how I did this. It's working close. It's definitely off a little bit from when I first built the scene. I had to do some tweaking of different stuff. But the first thing is the medium radius. And this is what I've believed is kind of determining like how far, like the scale that you want to set originally. Actually, let's see. Let's go up here. Which I do love about Octane is that you can just click that and it sends you here, which you don't want to be in. This is great stuff about the HDRI, but we want to go to volumetrics. And if you have any like other like super detailed stuff, I would jump inside the help doc here, because they actually have some pre-built scenes that like kind of go over setups for God rays with their volumetric fog kind of loader that you can do, or the second scene is kind of what we're doing here is with the environment. So they have loaded like up the daylight and an Octane environment light as their HDRI. And these are kind of where I got the starts of where I should pull numbers from, is that they set theirs to 3,000. I kind of like upped it by an increment of 10 for 30,000. There's not a huge jump that I noticed, but I noticed if this goes back down to like its default of 10, it is really dense, and it kind of throws off the numbers that you set inside of it. So that's the first thing to set, and then you can adjust your numbers afterwards. And what they've gone with here is outdated a little bit. They haven't updated their help doc about it, but I updated mine to match closely, so those numbers in here in mine will be correct. But it just tells you kind of the different values that you'll want to be setting, and a little bit blurb about like what they're doing technically behind the scenes. And this, if you use their setup, which is outdated and I think won't work anymore, will get you, unless you're in 2019, will get you this like super dense fog, which was what I was looking for, but I also had to kind of hack in what I can do to get these like sharper lines, which I wanted the headlights to have, because with the other version it would just kind of be everywhere and it was like super bloomed out. But I can show you here. We're gonna let it go again. Man, I wish I had better graphics cards, because I'm also streaming, so it's probably cutting that time. So if we kit this down to 3,000 and let it think about itself. I wonder if we're gonna crash Octane. Okay. Send it again. So the difference between 30, I don't know why it's 30, that might have been a mistake, but this is 3,000. But their default is like 10. Maybe it's not as big a deal at 20. No, it is. Okay. So the default of 10 is like crushing the scale between like you and like the light. So we can see it, but it's just like smushing down the scale of our scenes volumetrics, which is weird, because the way that I understand that Octane's this kind of like universal fog works is it puts a sphere, like a super dense sphere, around your scene based on the camera, and then this slider here is saying the scale may be way off, but is there a bokeh technique with Octane? Not really. There you can adjust the bokeh if that's what you're asking, like the to get like anamorphic-esque stuff and different blade counts, but I don't think there's like a loader like Redshift has where you can load different images. There may be. I just downloaded Octane yesterday to be able to cover this because I remember that it was built in Octane, but the Redshift is like what I've been rendering with for like the past 7 months due to like work and not wanting to run like 2 subscriptions at the same time, so I just paused my Octane. So there may be. There are definitely way better Octane guys, C40 Octane guys like David, Octane Jesus, are you? I think that's how you say his last name. He would probably be the best person to ask on like Instagram or Twitter, as far as like camera, bokeh and stuff. If you're asking about that, but not that I know of, you can't really customize that inside of Octane. But yeah, so 10 centimeters is super tiny, but we want to expand it because we are further away, and so I kind of, their boat scene was like a large scale environment, so 3000 seemed to do the trick. And then in comparison to that, okay, Arnold has a very nice and easy way to do it, but I haven't found it for Octane yet. Octane for Houdini. Yeah, Octane for Houdini is another step weirder because the people who make the plugin for Cinema and the people who make the plugin for Octane for Houdini are not the same team, and so there's like slight discrepancies between them. Let's reload that back up. Which is why actually I was like more confident jumping into Redshift, because the Redshift plugin inside of Cinema and inside of Houdini are nearly identical. Everything is named the same. The workflows work the same. So it's a lot easier to, if you understand it in one, to go in the other. But yeah, I haven't touched Arnold in years. I think the last time was like 2017 was when I got into Arnold, but it was just too slow. But I'm sure that it's better now. I know that they have that GPU one going. So inside, what is that? Inside, sorry for that noise. My wife is getting a Facebook call on her laptop and not answering it on her phone. So that's what that sound is. Hopefully it'll go away soon. Inside, the density is low. It looks low, but this is a really touchy thing. I don't know what it is by default. Let's see if we turn this off and turn this guy on and just add fog. So you can see this is set to 10 and that's set to 0.05. So it's closer now. Before it was, I think, set to like 1 or something in 2019, and you just like immediately turn it on and your scene was gone. So yeah, we're going to want to keep that at 0.1. So technically doubled from the default. And then the volume step length, I brought down a bunch. 1 second. I'm gonna have to figure out how to stop this. Sorry about that. Yeah, that was annoying. So the volume step length is by default, as we can see here, set to 4, but I cranked mine way down to like 1.6. And what I noticed when I did this is that super finite details, like if you have wispy smoke and like texture inside of the smoke, if you bring down the step length, it takes a little bit longer to resolve cleanly, but you get a lot more detail. So like from 4 to like 1 is like a big jump, but I found like right around here was a decent kind of like window that worked for me. I haven't used sample displacement yet. That's a new 2020 thing. Maybe look into that. I did not. But the main other two things are your phase, which I had played with like cranking it one way or the other, and it just kind of shifts, you know, towards or away from the light scattering. So if we crank it like over here, we kind of get, I think this would be closer to the light. We lose that guy up there almost entirely. We shift it this way, we get a lot more of that guy, but these are a lot less strong. And it's just different scattering techniques, same as the way it works in the SSS inside of a material. If we go to the where did it go? Oh, it's because this is a glossy material. That makes sense. I was very, very confused. Yeah, so medium. Same as a scattering medium here, and the phase that that has. And I think Octane 2020 wants you to work with like an Uber shader, so these are even out of date. But that's kind of, you can see that the scattering happens a lot closer to the lights and is not traveling as far or as universally spread. So I just set that to 0 and tried to balance it more with my absorption and scattering sliders here. And so this guy is, just a touch, and these are what I pulled from that help document, just a touch to the right of like 50, which would be the middle of this one, which they want you to kind of start with. And so I just brought it over a little bit. So if we drop this all the way down scattering wise, it kills it completely. So it's like a black and white mapped value. You might want to use floats in here instead of RGB, but their help document showed RGB, so that's just kind of what I kept it to. And if we go 100, it's all scattering. But it softened up the edge on the headlights a little bit too much. So I just brought it down just a tad, because I did want a lot of that scattering so that it did do so that it kind of lit the side of the vehicles, but I didn't want it to get too scattered where I didn't have a crisp edge. And then the absorption is kind of, the other gotcha is that it's inverted. So that's one thing that you have to remember, and that's kind of the same as the SSS. Like when you want a certain color inside your object to be scattered, and you're like, I want blue inside, it's inverted. And so you don't get blue, you get the other, you're stopping blue and letting other light through the object, which is a slightly confusing thing. So they have that invert button kind of set on by default. So when you click green, it inverts and lets green through like you would think it would, I believe. I may have that backwards, but I think that that's how scattering works. So if we take this down all the way, this is no absorption. If we bring it up all the way, you see how crazy the light gets to go around everywhere. But this is backwards, and so you're white is actually black now, and so there's no absorption happening. But if you bring it down to black, there is really white because it's inverted happening, so it's absorbing a lot. I'm just gonna Control Z and bring that back. So I wanted it to be absorbed a little bit, but not completely absorbed. Okay, so that's all the settings inside the Octane environment. The lights inside of the car are just like an Octane area light. No image HDRI kind of loaded in or anything, just like a very standard light. Let's see if we pull that guy out. Yeah. Okay, right. I forget you have to click the tag, because I was like, there's no way that this light is white. Right. You click the tag and you see that it's just using the black body emission temperature, and it's just super red. So we could crank that guy and have a whole new render. Let's bring it back inside the vehicle really quick. And I gotta say, Octane's behaving way more stable than I thought it would, due to streaming and just stressing my graphics cards out. But if we just take that guy and bring him blue, take this guy and bring him blue, we have a whole nother whole new render. And then I think this is the taillights, so these guys make sense to be that color. They're just same kind of deal. I turned off all of the helpful things where it's trying to base it off the scale, because it just gets a little bit too confusing if I'm scaling the cars up and down and their power is turning up and down. So I just keep it locked at a value that I can kind of determine. I do normally turn off the diffuse, just because I don't want it bleeding into it at all and messing up the color when it gets too low. So that's just a standard thing, but that may be totally different in 2020, because I know their entire material systems are way different. But we could bring this guy also to be blue. And then these are our headlights. I brought them like a little bit warmer, but we could get these guys to be crazy blue too. So now it's nighttime. Now we have a whole new render, and we can actually turn this guy to be the scary red guy. Cool. And to kind of look dev this scene, my entire process, because I was kind of working in the dark due to I didn't know how it would like clean up at all, was just like grabbing this little tiny render view and being like, okay, so when we get up to about like, 15 or like 2,000 samples, seems like I can call it good there. And then I'd go like into another like key area and like kind of just like let it work. And this is typically, it was like my standard workflow inside of Octane, because I just never had like a 10 GPU machine. So I was just constantly like getting the fuzziest of idea of what like my general lighting was looking like, and then like going into each little tiny section, and then just kind of, obviously you can just check it if in your settings you have the adaptive sampling turned on. And I have this actually like a little bit, it's like 0.03 by default, so I turn that up a tad. But this gives you the noise pass, and you can see the green there. That means that those are like due to the adaptive and like my overall max samples. This is like clean, essentially. So you can see that it's been going up to 7,000, and this is not clean yet. But visually, to your eye, it can look fine. And so I mostly do things to like what I think I can get away with, like adding grain on top of. For my personal stuff, for client stuff, that's a whole different story. I definitely do it to a certain level for look dev and style frames. See what they're thinking like that. Normally, like your creative director will kind of like give notes on that, and then we will kind of talk back and forth about like the total cleanliness of the samples that we need to hit, with like noise reduction sometimes, and then just general grain, if you can even tell that there is grain in the image. So for this one, if you like zoom in, there is still a ton of grain, and this is majority from just Octane not doing a clean render. I just didn't let it go high enough. And then, overall, I just always add grain onto my stuff to help smooth it out. But if we look at, this is the default, so this is kind of crazy. This is the default render, all clean, of that scene. Then I just took it in, did like a little bit of color correction inside of, I don't even think Photoshop or anything. I think this was like Visco, like the mobile app. Normally if I'm just doing stills and I'm just like throwing them up on social, I do one pass of like a Visco edit, and that's it, and then they go up. So these were actually, I kind of pushed this a little bit farther because I didn't like how dark this was, so it's like the exposure was brought up a little bit, which helped in the headlights. And then this was a little bit too green and like warm in that section, so I kind of cooled it out and gave it a magenta push on that side. But yeah, this is normally the amount of like color correction that goes into my stuff. They tend to come out like kind of muddy, just because after like a couple hours of working on it, I've like gotten a weird color space, and I know that I'm just going to color correct it later, so I just kind of get my values to a decent place where I'm like getting enough information, and then I just pull it over and do a couple tweaks inside of color correction, and that's kind of my workflow. For stills, at least, especially personal project stills, totally different story for freelance stuff, and a lot of the times I'm not the one doing the color on the freelance stuff, so just get it like a pretty universally flat image for them in that case. But that is the Octane scene. Let's see if it says that it's clean. Yeah, not clean at 30,000. No way I'm rendering that much. I rendered at, this is a test, but I rendered at 12,000. And if you're like an Octane person and you're gonna do volumetric stuff, I think the best bet for you would be PMC up here. I did a path tracing because I needed GI, and I don't think volumetrics work very well inside of direct lighting. Maybe they do now in 2020. But PMC would probably be your best bet. It's just such a different build. It's not as easy as flipping over to PMC, and it just renders and cleans up faster. But overall, I think the speed increase is definitely there for PMC. But yeah, so inside of the render settings, nothing's too out of the ordinary. This is pretty usual setup, so I needed a lot of samples in both of those just to get the light bouncing around enough to light up the side of the car and stuff like I wanted. Scatter depth is new in 2020. I didn't know what it was, so I just added it up to match those ones. So maybe I should look at the documentation for that. Filter size, I float between 1.2, which is the default, and 1.5, and that's purely because of digging into other people's scenes that have done like pretty nice photorealistic stuff. Some people float it up to like 1.5 just to help like really smooth out some of their like, so everything's not super crisp, but I keep it just at default. The caustic blur, this is something that like is like based on your taste of like photorealism that you're going for. I mean, this is the default, and you could definitely bring this down lower if like you actually modeled like the headlight glass and all of that stuff and you want stuff happening there. But honestly, sometimes I'll just slide this like up to like 0.1, and it doesn't, you can't really notice, especially in something super abstract like this where you're not getting a ton of it. And the GI clamp I brought way down. This is something I actually got from Rafael Raul, who's like very much knowledgeable in the photorealistic space, but it's like if you, I think by default this is like 10,000 or like 1,000 or something, and you just don't need Octane to be thinking that much about the global illumination bounces, so I just like brought that down to 50. I keep it between like, never really go lower than 50, but this scene is so, I didn't really need that much going on GI wise. Wow, that's a fun glitch. What in the world is that? Whoa, weird. Okay, let's get rid of that. Yeah. So the GI clamp I brought way down. Pretty sure by default it is up to like 10,000 or 1,000. No AI lights. I don't know what that is. It's new. I'm sure it could help in this scenario. I've seen some of their demos where they've been using AI lights and different volumetric stuff, and it worked like super fast, but at the time that I built this, it wasn't a thing. Everything else, I use static noise for my still renders just in case I need to go back in and render something else like a section, and it's not that noticeable, but I've just like found if I know I'm going to be doing a still and maybe possibly adding to it later on, I do static noise so that it's not random every single time I render. I kind of know where that the noise will be stamped the same way, that it figures it out. Not a big thing, I just personally normally do that unless I'm going animation, and then you want to uncheck that. And then adaptive sampling is all just pretty much default. I made the group pixels a little bit bigger so that it really kind of has to vet more pixels to make sure that like this min sample, which is actually pretty low, I would probably want to crank that up to get a cleaner base render. That would probably help with, oh my gosh, did we close those other ones? Oh well. A cleaner base render, because if it's terminating and thinking it's checked for by a little group, and 250 is like obviously still super low if we set this to go again. So by there, essentially, this is close to like what it's thinking is finished, and it's going to check everyone else and see if they're finished, and so you'll probably want to bring that up so that it doesn't falsely confirm that your image is noise free, seeing as you probably need like 12,000 to 20,000 depending on how many GPUs you have and the amount of time you have. But this was personal, so I just like let it go overnight. I don't exactly know how long it took to render, but it took more than a couple hours, I'm pretty sure, on two 1080 Ti's. So it was very heavy. And that is all of this Octane portion. I know I've been rambling for a little bit. Oh wow, we're almost at an hour. Okay. Is there any questions that anyone has before we move on to the Redshift section and the After Effects section of this? Anybody in the chat got a question? Let's rescale that. If not, we can just move on to the other scene. And that would be this guy. And how we set this up. Cool. Okay. Looking all good. No questions. Again, thank you to everyone that stopped by. All 9 of you guys. And yeah, I hope that these are helpful. These are pretty much what I was thinking I would be streaming most of the time, just due to the amount of like DMs that I get of people asking like, hey, can you like do a tutorial? And tutorials are like a little bit more intensive when I make them or like break down a certain thing, and take a lot of editing. And so it's a lot easier just to go live and then cut that down into like a more usable bit after it's already went up and people have already had time to like interact with it, and get their questions out. So this one, after I took the other one, I was like, I want to do a Houdini sim, but I also need to animate that then, and there's no way I'm gonna let my computer just render for a month to finish this in Octane. And I had been wanting to get more into Redshift anyways, so I was just like, okay, we're gonna tackle this. And when I peeked into that scene for this stream, it was so not built correctly. It works, like I'm fine with this image, but I'll open it up and you guys can kind of see what's going on. So the first weird thing, I'm gonna switch to my Redshift layout. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna close that other scene too. Shrubbery Racing. Switched to Redshift a year ago, haven't looked back, been using it for multiple large production, or large production for Razer. Yeah. My idea is that like, I don't think the render wars are helpful to debate or talk about. I think it's like they're tools, use the right one for the job, and it just happens that with my setup I have with two 1080 Ti's, any amount of thing that I'm going to do in animation, I'm just going to do in Redshift because that's the amount of time I have to kind of wait. And Octane is like great. And if I'm going to do a still, now more, I'll go back into relearning Octane 2020, but like, I just can't, sit there and wait and like optimize and kind of, maybe with Octane 2020, it's like way better. I've heard a lot of people saying that it's like super stable. It's the most stable it's been. So maybe I will look into it and dig around with it more and figure out if I can use it for animation. But yeah, same. The studio I'm at, a lot of studios here in New York are also switching to Redshift just because they don't want to have to build a massive GPU farm. They just kind of want like each artist to be able to do it per machine decent enough, and then maybe use Deadline as like a lot of people are using out here to do like group renders if they need to. But oh, definitely, it is so much quicker. Yeah, that's where I was. Octane for dailies, but production Redshift all the way. And there's definitely been things like I kind of said earlier in that Octane render, I was able to texture a light with an emissive texture, and it influenced the volumes in the scene, whereas we'll get into this one. I'm just gonna close this guy. No. Inside of this one, you kind of see it there, is that if you texture it with any texture you have in Redshift with an emissive material, as far as I know, it will not be able to influence your volumes. You can use, like, if we go and make a new Redshift material, there are these lights and stuff that you can do inside of Redshift, and there's different like incandescent materials, but inside of their settings, these are all you get to like influence or turn up and turn down. You can't, like you can on a light, turn up your contribution scale to volumes. So that was an odd workaround. And so there's like little tiny things here and there between the two. I think that Redshift for a long time was way more stable. I could throw way more polygons at it, and I wasn't worried that it was going to crash. Yeah, but Octane definitely wins inside of volumetric realism, and the way that it scatters, super great, just takes forever. And for 99% of the things with volumetrics, when a creative director is like, hey, can we add some like volumetrics on those lights? Redshift and a spotlight, Redshift volume and a spotlight is like what they were thinking of. I also really love, and we'll get into it, is that in any of the volumetric things, you can make a volumetric texture, and you can add, or not this one, but if we make a volumetric, create Redshift volume. Inside of here, you can add noises and stuff to your volume. And let's see, so we just add a noise. Oh, how did I do this before? Which one is it? None of them, but I've done this before. Okay, maybe I didn't do it in the scene, but you can add a noise texture to your volumes, and so that's just like a generic 3D noise that it will put in space, but for a lot of stuff it will like give that detail of like a higher res sim to have like all that like information inside your simulation without actually having to like do any other resims on top of it. And I know you can do that with like noises in the in Octane's volume like VDB object, but not inside of their HDR environment like world volume, which is a little bit annoying. So Redshift and everything wrong with how I built this scene. So the first weirdest thing, I don't know what I did, but I didn't use GI at all, which may sound like a lie. When you look at this, you're like, no, there's definitely GI, but there is not. There are a lot of like kind of lights painted around the scene to just light the objects, and there's you know, I guess global illumination, not really in terms of the setting, but there's scattering happening inside the volume or the VDBs here, but there's no real GI happening in the scene. So that actually helped it a ton, I would assume. I didn't know that I did that when I opened up the file and was like, oh, okay, that seems really not correct, but when I clicked render, it was pretty close. So if we kick this off, it's gonna think. It's gonna send some of over. Does that smoke Houdini or turbulence? So I am at this point I was getting like used to using Houdini for sims, and so this is kind of our base amount of noise, kind of the same as Octane in the IPR at least. And I'll just pause that. But yeah, it's done in Houdini, and maybe I'll talk about that now. So in Houdini, I'm just going to show these flipbooks as like the ideation process. So it's just this. It's like, I'm just going to set these to repeat. It was just a plane that I had like made that kind of covered all of my scenes. So like the car is about this big inside of this sim. And then it is just a noise on a plane to drive the density, and then a couple like like turbulence and other effectors to like give it this shape. And I didn't get time to clean up this hip file. And I don't know if all this stuff is cached properly or not, so that's why we're not going to really jump into that. That could be a later stream or something, if people are interested enough. But this was my first time kind of doing a big sim that I would be close up to, that wasn't like an explosion or like your typical sim kind of stuff. It was just like this like weird like ambient growth. So this was the first pass at it, and I was like, this is like okay. It's not exactly what I wanted. And so I was like, I wanted to like go a little bit slower because that was like picking up speed really fast. So this was the next kind of idea, and it definitely grows off a lot slower in its velocity. And then these were just like a couple tests of like trying to fine tune how like the resolution of the sim. And then this was an up-res, so between this guy, and it was like a little bit fuzzier, and this guy just took that fuzzy sim, which if you've never done that, definitely look up. A lot of people have tutorials on it. I can't remember whose I watched. It was Trevor, I think is his name, in CG Forge. You can look that up on YouTube. Maybe I'll drop a link. Let's see if I can look it up. So CG Forge, Houdini, up-res. Yeah. Okay. Just gonna paste this. This will also be in the files that I put up after the stream. So he kind of covers the way that you can take like a super low res cache of sim, like at maybe like 4 times as big voxel resolution as you want your final to be, and instead of just like keep cranking that one, you can send it over into the up-res shelf tool, and it intuitively up-reses everything and looks at the different like forces that you have applied as it's up-resing it. So it's a way faster way of doing it, and I've done it like for everything now, because I mean, unless you like absolutely need to do super high res like out of the gate, I would definitely previs in this low res, get like your general movements all correct, and then you can up-res afterwards, and it will still like be generally the same flow of like, you know, rise and everything and like turbulence amount. It will just have like all these crisp details inside of where it's kind of like fuzzy right now. So that was what this up-res was. And then this was a little bit more of like playing with density amounts, and this is the up-res for that. And this is the full thing, not in perspective. And so it's kind of this like steam-esque. I wanted a lot of these like billowy, and not too curly. I didn't want it to look wispy. I wanted it kind of the idea of smoke that comes like off of like a manhole or something in the city was like the reference that I was like looking at for this. So there's a lot of detail inside of each like little cloud and like plume that goes up, and like even in there you can see all the like variation of these overlaid, but it all just starts with like a super fine detail noise pattern that is like animating. And so other than turbulence, I think I also have like a lot of curl going on to affect that, but that's all that I'll kind of cover there. Yeah, it was done in Houdini, not in turbulence, just because I wanted to learn Houdini's pyro solving, but also turbulence FD was just like not so great at the up-res. It always looked way different than what I was testing on. I do the low res up-res with turbulence and it works real well. Yeah, I had a bunch of issues where like I wasn't sure like if it was actually gonna be like up-resed, and that may have been user error of not being able to up-res or setting it properly there. But yeah, a lot of people don't like jumping to Houdini if it's like just gonna be for that. My whole goal was to learn like a lot of Houdini, and so I was like, oh, I have like a use case I can like dip my toe in. But yeah, especially for all the different things you can do on top of your sim with VDBs and Houdini, I would definitely, that's where I just go now a lot for my sims, because technically, Turbulence FD is, you know, a lot easier because you don't really leave cinema and you can use all your stuff and you don't export any alembics as like collision objects or anything. But yeah, Houdini's amount of tools that you can edit your sim after it's done and use the cache of a low res in a bunch of different areas and feed in different things, like do particle sims on top of it and like re-emit from those. That's kind of, you know, my whole reason that I did that workflow. Oh, my dog. That's a fun emote. Or are those emotes, or are those just like emojis? I've seen a couple different ones used, but yeah, that is kind of the breakdown of the smoke sim. And then I just loaded that inside of Redshift. As you know, it's pretty easy to do. You just, you know, simple a frame range. It's 140 frames, so I did it for all of it. This was at 24 frames per second. But the difference is here, the scale comparison between Houdini and Cinema is like 1 to 100. So you just got to remember, if you do a sim inside of Houdini and you bring it over into Cinema, it's going to be very, very, very tiny. Same thing with when I brought these cars over to like check scale. Had to bring it down to like 0.01 the scale of what they were in Cinema. In case you're like thinking of doing any simming off of like, you know, the hood or something, you'll just bring that scale way down, or else you'll be doing it at an insane scale. And a lot of Houdini's defaults, you'll seem to have to be like changing all the defaults. But if you just shrink it down, a lot of the defaults will work in your favor. So other stuff inside of Redshift. So I mean, the main advantage, kind of like we were talking about, is that I could target you know, overrides for different things. Like I knew that I had like a lot of these reflections I was going to want to punch up, same as the lighting in general, and then also the volume, because each light I just kind of set to its default samples of 16, and I knew that I would just override it all up here. These settings I think are what I used for the final. I brought up the min samples from like 4 to 16. These samples, I go back and forth at like my approach for this. I learned a lot of what I do in Redshift from Rich Nosworthy. Has his like intro to Redshift for Cinema 4D, and that's kind of a lot of where I picked up like the sampling methods from. So shout out to Rich, he's a good friend. But yeah, no GI, no caustics, nothing else going on. This is kind of a thing that I've been doing more recently, and if you have a good machine, it's definitely worth doing. Helps speed up your renders. It's just cranking the bucket size up as big as you can so that it's able to calculate in like bigger chunks, and it's slower to like start to see your final image, but in overall render times, it's always been faster for me. But yeah, that's all the render settings. Way different ideology. I mean, not too different if you're just sticking to like brute force and like your min max samples and never overriding. That's like fairly close to the way that Octane would do it. But the whole advantage of Redshift is that you can get into these very specific and kind of fine tune the amount that you're doing for everything. But for the most part, I'm just kind of keeping it 4 times the size of my max in the unified sampling, just to clean up these areas, because these are normally my problem areas for most scenes that I do. But inside of the rest of the scene, just loading them in. This is different every time because I tend to have different densities of VDBs that I feed in. But these are all the scattering and absorption inside of Redshift. I wanted it to be pretty thin because I still wanted to see through it. For the most part, I wanted it to kind of just cut through, and so you'd still get that like nice hard edge, which is way sharper than the edge inside of Octane. Let me pull up that guy. Octane render. So this edge here is like a lot grainier. than what I was able to get in Redshift. And that's just due to the way how Redshift kind of like takes a light and then like you assign it to contribute to the volume, versus Octane, which everything is contributing the same amount always, which takes just a lot longer for it to get you a clean image. And I mean, in the IPR, it's super grainy, but if I just like get a little section and turn on bucket, which is going to take a bit because I have bigger buckets, it's going to clean up way faster. Zach says, automatic sampling in the latest few versions of Redshift has been really good, super efficient and quick. Yeah, I have been playing around with that a little bit. For my stuff at this point, I mean, like if I would have first jumped into Redshift, I would have definitely been just clicking that on, because for a lot of the times until you kind of can have that like forced feeling of like, it's low in the light and it's low in reflection, I can just like up those but keep everybody else low. If you're just looking to get like a general like think of it for me and clean it up for me, that's definitely a great way, and I'll show everyone where that is. But you can see inside your bucket rendering, that was like 38 seconds of this, and it's super clean. You can even see some of the volumetric there. It's clean, it's rendering fine. And once I saw that, I was like, great, this will work for animation and it won't look terrible. But yeah, that automatic sampling, I think if you go into systems, it's down here. No. GI bump. I thought it would be, isn't it a legacy thing where you turn on the automatic sampling, Zach? That's automatic material conversion. Somewhere in your settings. No, I'm there. Okay, yeah, experimental options, not legacy options. Automatic sampling. You can click it on there. I'm on 3.06 Redshift. Yeah, experimental options. Yeah, you lose the fine control, but this is like a really great thing if you're like under the gun, don't want to be like messing with stuff. You can just click that on and it will override a lot of your stuff, and you can kind of just set your min-max and it will go from there. Your adaptive threshold, which is by default like 0.01. I'm bringing up a little bit for a lot of stuff just because that little extra 5 really saves on render time for me a lot, and is not too noticeable. It doesn't get too like flickery or weird, but you can even tell inside this render that there's like some areas that are, especially when we go into the depth of field, that like tire is a little flickery, but overall when you add grain on top, it's unnoticeable. But for the volumes, it's all dependent on your scene, but these are kind of the ramps that I clamp up the scatter and use super low values, and then even lower for the absorption, because I didn't want it doing too much, but I did like cut it in half way down. And these are not exactly one-to-ones of what I would do in Octane because of their different methods, which is a little bit annoying. But yeah, just pulling density for the scatter as an attribute from the Houdini sim. That's kind of another big gotcha, is to just save your VDB from Houdini, but strip it of everything that you don't need, because I wasn't doing that for the longest time, and you just get massively bloated VDB files because it's like packing so much stuff from the, if you're doing automated pyro setups, it's like packing a lot of good information in there, but it's also bloating your scene if you're just going to pull like density and then maybe like your velocity fields for motion blur. But I didn't have like too much moving on. I didn't need really motion blur on this. Okay, so I'm just going to pause that, take the crop off. So that's everything up there that was different. Obviously, I have 2 here. If I turn this guy on in the scene, inside of display, set it to bounding box, but this is the points, which is really great that Redshift does this. Octane does something very similar, but it just like confirms that your VDB is working. It's like pulling it properly. So this is kind of from that video. This is, I keep closing stuff when I shouldn't. This is the scale of the cars inside of the billowing smoke. So it gets pretty tall. Fills up the whole scene. Can't even see it. And then the second smoke, put that back to bounding box, is this guy. And he was just, I knew I didn't need the whole thing like Octane. And Redshift does have that. You can add in a environment and mess with it here. But I knew I just needed like a little tiny bit of it. And I wanted to add some different mapping to it in like I did the other volumes, so I just added this tiny little bounding box around the scene so that my camera was sitting inside of it and able to get this general fog that you're seeing there is just that box sitting on top of it instead of having an entire environment. I don't know if it's technically faster to do that. That was in a technique I tried on this one, but I've definitely used just Redshift's environment and it works fine for a lot of stuff. So those are the volume differences inside of this one, and then the other half of this, so I'm just going to turn off that guy, turn this to bounding box, is the lights. So the headlights, I knew I wanted the same kind of shape as I had in Octane, but Octane I just textured the actual whole headlight. And in this one, I wanted to get a little bit more detailed with it. And I stumbled across a little bit of a issue inside of Redshift is that Redshift, for the most part, I'm actually going to pause this. We're going to open a new scene. So if we get a sphere and we get going there, looks beautiful. Set this to Redshift. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much. Then we get light. Oh, that's a material. Get a Redshift light. And then we put this to a spotlight. Go down. Crank up all that. Cool. So if we did that Redshift environment, nothing happens. But if we go into the volume and start introducing it, it's like, wow, that's instant. That is amazing. That is God rays, or like whatever you were planning to do. I mean, most of the time when I was doing stuff, I was like looking exactly for this. And to recreate this inside of Octane would be just as heavy as the other scene I was rendering. It would take a million years to like clean up. You know, a caveat, maybe not in 2020. I know they were working on stuff, so take this with a grain of salt. But when I was kind of approaching it, I was like, this is exactly what I want. This is great. And that would be the case. But this is just using, I mean, it's best case to use a spotlight when you're wanting to like contribute to a volume or a fog, because it's a lot less wasted energy and you're going to get a lot cleaner result. So, I mean, we can crank it up. We can open up we can make a whole wall of it. And that's kind of what I've done for the most part in a lot of cases. Even if I have other lights in the scene, I'll just make this invisible to these guys, and then I'll just have like a fog light, which runs really fast. Same kind of technique as if you've ever done caustics inside of Redshift. You just kind of make like a fake light parented to your other light just to shoot the volume contribution or the caustic contribution, and it works for 99% of the stuff. But I was thinking, I was like, okay, I've done stuff where like this shape is like pretty boring, and if I did an area light, it's, I mean, it's clean, but it's also like not inside of there. But I mean, you know, super fast comparatively to other stuff. But I was like, what if I did like an IES light, which is, let's not flip that. Let's just go back to our other scene and grab one of these guys. I'll show you what this means. Let's pull him into the center of the scene. Okay. Just gonna get that going again. And it is oh so bright. Let's turn that down. I'm going to turn off this light. And what you can see is this, inside the fog, the fall off is way different. And it's pulling from this IES file that if you just search the content browser for, you just do like IES. And it'll give you all of these, not that. Why is it giving me that? Where is this sitting? It's sitting in maybe after IES light. Well, not IES. Come on, let's type. Okay, here we go. Okay, so you just by default inside of Cinema have a ton of different fall offs, and that's like the shaping that I was wanting, because when you have like a headlight, it has all these interesting little details inside of its fall off, or I mean, it depends on the headlight that you're going for, but I was like, that'd be awesome if I could take that and use that in my fall off. And Redshift even has like an IES light that you can set. But it was extremely noisy in these areas, which when you look at this guy, area light, similar thing, but when you go to a spotlight and then crank up all of its settings, it was super clean. Like it figures itself out super fast. So that was kind of a downside. I really wanted to use this like interesting shape. It just like took a little bit longer to clean up, and that's in using Redshift's environment. When I loaded a VDB, it took even longer. So let's pull actually this guy. So we're going to kill the environment. We're going to take this guy, put him in the center. It's weird that it's off center from that. I wonder what that box is. Okay. So that's why we had to crank it up, because the density of this volume was a lot. So if we add the intensity to up here, so you can start to see before it was solving really fast, and now not so much. I mean, it's still contributing the same way, it's just way noisier. Whereas this guy should be a ton more. So it cleans up a lot faster as a spotlight, but it's just a lot noisier. So maybe if you're going to do just a blanket of environment like I was going for, best bet would probably be to go with just the environment. And then if you need to load in a VDB like a smoke sim, you'll just have to know that the spotlight will clean up faster than an IES light. Similar to a spotlight will clean up faster than an area light. And that's just kind of a gotcha there, but definitely way faster than when I was doing it inside of Octane. So I'd kind of set up spotlights the same way I did my IES lights when I was doing this, and you can kind of, I'll show you the difference between the two of those. So it takes a bit, starts chugging along, and the IES lights are actually really nice in that because it's an actual IES light that Redshift has up here. In the preview, you can preview a wireframe of the light, which is nice to get a general shape of like what it's going to be in its fall off. And so this, if we just save this really quick to the picture view, turn it off here, turn on all these other ones. So while there's so many other ones, I mean, it gives you a little bit better idea of where your fall off is going to be. This is using spotlights, a little bit too tunnely for what I would want, but we can change that just with the here we go, take all those guys. These are all area lights. Here are all the spotlights. We just open this up to something like 80. Get us a little bit better of fog. I could probably put this back to 652 because we're feeding in an image that is a little bit warmer. Maybe 5. Yeah, that seems better. So the difference here is that the IS lights are getting us this nice, interesting, very headlight-esque fog shape, and lighting the fog really well, but we lose some of the lighting on the headlight, which in here I really wanted to sell, like how bright they were kind of piercing through this fog. So if we turn off these guys, turn off all the spotlights, and jump into a closer look, you can start to see it kind of on the floor there. But those headlights look way more like headlights than our generic Octane just white, which it could be that, but I thought this was a lot more fun. And this is all just driven from a little tiny, a bunch of little tiny Octane or Redshift area lights set to a spherical shape with this texture HDRI on top of them. So a long time ago, don't remember where I got these from. I got these like single lights where someone took photos of like, and then different temperatures of these like photo studio lights. And this one worked really well sitting inside this kind of chromed out reflector of the car to sell the idea of like a super detailed headlight. And they're just, the best way I got it to work was just a sphere. Make it a little bit bigger. You'll be able to see it pop up there. Let's turn down its intensity. It's getting a little too bright. Yeah, so you can start to actually see the shape of it. That's the little sphere that is now reflecting across this whole thing. And it really sells the idea of like a super detailed headlight. I'm not a car guy. That may look not real, but for the terms of like visual detail, it definitely worked enough for my purposes. And then I just added the IES lights on top of it, and I made sure that they were not visible to the camera. Oh, maybe they're never visible to the camera. Yeah, they're not visible to the camera anyways. The same as like an area light would be. Yeah, and so you can kind of start to see it on the edges of the headlights there, and then with these guys turned back on. And this will have the most amount of smoke in the scene, so it may look pretty grainy. Prepping materials, progressive rendering, yeah. But it really lets you kind of art direct the shape, and it will definitely render faster So if we go back into that little crop, maybe bring it here, set it to bucket mode, let it go for a little bit. Nice. Those light textures look amazing. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, it was like kind of like a little bit of a breakthrough where I was like, whoa, this looks a lot more like I thought I could get a headlight than having to like model like a glass front to it or something. It was just all reflectives off that like dome. So you can see down here already like super clean due to it being a spotlight. It like renders a lot faster. So let's see how long it takes for the top to kind of clean up. Turning it down in my headphones, but up on the computer side. Man, this is taking a little bit longer than I wanted it to. Could you use a texture in the spotlight to replicate the IES? So you can, but oh, so yeah, you can see that it's like a lot cleaner in there. That took a minute, so that's quite a big render hit. But the thing that I found was that the way that an IES file feeds information through a light, you saw that like there was like a different shape of like intensity plus fall off, whereas the like feeding in a texture, when I tried it just in the spotlight, it was like I just got one or the other. Like I could determine like not as bright here, brighter there, which was great because but it like the angle view and of the thing was kind of set, so you would get like long ones here, short ones here, but you couldn't quite get like a different shape inside of the fall off, so it couldn't like go out bright there and then like peak in later there because it didn't have that amount of information. It was kind of just like blasted out from the start of being like less light here, more light out there, less light there. Not a huge difference. I definitely think if you're like doing architectural visualization, go for IES, take the hit. But for 99% of the uses, just loading in the same way I did with that other thing, just a texture inside of your spotlight will get you enough visual difference inside of the fall off. Yeah, it's just a constant projection from that single point out, whereas in IES inside the math, it's like able to kind of change it later on, which is why you get these like crazy different shapes that it can kind of paint out. And actually, that is a good thing that I stumbled upon was this free resource called IES Generator. It allows you to, let's see if I can, IES Generator, Gen 3, come on. You are a program that I own. Weird. Okay, it's not going to open. I definitely own this program. But it allows you to kind of custom paint a fall off in this kind of view from the front down, and then you can save it out as an IES file and bring it in, and it will work. I did notice that you kind of have to figure out what the power differential is between these that Cinema saves at a certain level, and then you have to mess like this is at 10,000 intensity multiplier, which seems like a lot, but when you look at it, I'm gonna stop this from going. But if you add in 1, you get nothing on the bar. 10, barely anything. 100, almost nothing. 1,000, you're getting there. Like it's sort of, you can see how far it's going to go out, so you really have to really crank them up to get them to really extend out when you're using an IES light. It's just the difference between how that file versus like an EXR is saving the energy that you're shooting out. And then when you make your own, you have to figure out kind of what the mapping is there. So if it looks like it's just doing nothing, you probably just have to bring your intensity multiplier way up. And you can use those IES lights in Octane or Redshift. It's just that Redshift has like a nice little specific light for it. Those are all area lights. Yeah, it has a nice little light for it. And you can see the wireframe and all of that, like preview of it. So those were all of the lighting for the volume differences between this one and the Octane one. The car, I knew I wanted to update some of the textures. I didn't go crazy, but I definitely put like a little bit more thought into it. So something like the leather, I actually like put in some maps. This one looks like it's an aluminum texture because it visually looked fine. Probably could have put in a real leather texture, Isaac, but I was just kind of quickly like triplanar so that I didn't have to UV unwrap anything, and then, you know, just ramping it to kind of customize it to like what I wanted going into each little thing. Just, you know, some normals to add a little bit of detail, and then a roughness map. And this is kind of my like 50% texturing that I'll do for stuff when it's like, okay, it needs to look a little bit visually different. I would say like my effort in the Octane was almost like just 5-10%. It was almost all defaults with like a little bit of attention to detail and like the roughness variations between things. This is my next pass, would be like making, okay, I have a diffuse from a texture. Okay, it's gonna have like a range from like, it's gonna be generally darker, but from black to 50% gray, so that there's some visual noise breakup there. And then just a roughness from probably the same texture build, and then just taking a normals from that. Looks like I'm using like a bump, yeah, height field bump. And so this is kind of my approach if I'm doing it from a library. I mean, I just have like a texture library full of things I've collected over the years, but now I'm using Megascans more, and they already have kind of a really nice workflow where they auto-populate your texture nodes for you. And so that's kind of like where that's like will replace this kind of workflow for a lot of this stuff, because most of the things are like real life things that they have scanned, and I'll just use those and kind of tweak them with different ramps here and there, and adjust those values. And then kind of the next step up was the little details for the glass. And so this one, you can kind of see it inside the render. There's like a little bit of roughness variation of dirt or something that's on there. It's super subtle. You can see it a little bit more down there, and definitely in the high res version of it. But that's just from taking this one noise breakup. I think it says it's like aluminum, so I was just reusing that everywhere for a general breakup of noise. So if we open that over here, come on. That's taking us to a web page. Why would I want to take us to a web page? Wiping residue. Cool. That just wants to go to web page. It's because I have it linked up to my NAS, which technically is through the web that I pull a lot of my assets from. That's why it's getting confused. I would highly recommend getting one of those. It's like I have 15 terabytes on there, and so I just like offload all my assets up to there, and then if I'm really like pulling down like a 4K video or something, I'll like bring it locally, but it keeps my machine from having to store all of those assets, and it's super nice. And it also is running a RAID setup, so if one of the hard drives fails, then all my assets are still saved. I had to go through that last year when one of my hard drives failed on my computer, and it was a nightmare of backing up stuff and trying to make sure I didn't lose anything client side and also personal side, and like my asset library. So now I am very much like triple backed up, so knock on wood that I don't have to utilize that. But so this is just using back to the texture, a black and white value texture, just to give some breakup. Triplanar again, which I use a lot just because I don't have time normally or care. for a lot of stuff like this car to like actually unwrap it. So I'll just use triplanar. Then, you know, it works, you know, 70% of the time. And then this goes as a ramp. Actually, let's see if we can turn off all this stuff. Just start looking at what the texturing job is going on. Okay, let's turn off these. So this is just the update also to the scene lighting. The car has this, same as the other render, just like a little red light to illuminate the interior. I also for this decided to just make a instance and flip it around because I didn't want to have to keep like updating. That was something that I kind of on the fly. I didn't do that in the other Octane scene, but for this one I wanted to actually like make sure I was setting things up properly. And then I also animated them. So this guy does like a little tiny turn. And that was just like a little thing that I thought was visually interesting for this update. I went to go animate it. But yeah, so there's this light. Now if we turn that off, this is the scene lighting that before I was kind of just, I didn't really have much going on scene lighting on the car, but because I wanted to update all of the stuff, I wanted to go a little bit more like traditional automotive, so I had like a little highlight up there, a little highlight over here to give like a lot more lighting on there. So this guy is lighting most of it. Where is this guy even lighting? Where is that light even sitting? Oh. Okay. I see. So this light is kind of acting the same as in before. This is just shooting light into the environment fog to kind of brighten up the background. And then this light is shooting this way and kind of hitting the front of these two cars. So this guy's less important, but that guy is a lot more important. This is actually a really cool moody render just by itself. But if we turn off those, we can go in to our system. Where would it be? I thought it was in our system. There was a setting to turn on and off the did it move somewhere? The default lights. But there it is. I don't have any lights on in this scene, do I? I don't think so. Oh, I have those rear lights. Okay, there we go. So if you do that, it will use just the default kind of camera light that Cinema uses. So if you have no lights on, it will utilize this default light, but I normally have it checked off so that when I have nothing going on in my scene, it actually is like pure dark. So if we go that again, it should, yeah. It should start rendering totally black, even though we have no lights on, but you can turn that on. I'm just going to turn that on to kind of show the different passes of this glass guy right here. Oh wow, we're already almost at 2 hours. That's good. There's only a little bit more to cover inside of the kind of After Effects setup. So I'm just going to have this guy go again. Turn off the instance as well. So you can kind of see it in there. You can see the glass I decided to be a little bit fancy with and add some dispersion to it. And also you can kind of see it a little bit better is it has this like overall general grime. So I'm going to turn off bokeh so that it actually is in focus. You can see what's going on. So there are hotkeys to do this that you can map, but I have I just updated and I forgot to map them to like the connect to output. Normally have that mapped to like A and Q, node to viewport, node to output, but I'll just do it here. So this is our just glass, which is pretty clean. It is getting bump from that same texture, so it's just deriving the roughness of the glass and the bump. What this guy just looks like is just this like kind of wipey kind of smear overall grime, and then I'm also taking that out, and so that's in this ramp, and then in the next ramp taking it out, it looks like I used the same value, so that could technically be the same. And then feeding it into a height field bump set pretty low, and then this is the dirt node, and it's just using that as bump and a default like kind of sandy color, and then using this also, I used it a lot apparently, so it's using this black and white value to run the bump, to run the roughness of the glass, and also to mask in how much dirt is blended into this blend material. So at the end it's super subtle, but if we cranked this up to like 1, you would start to see a lot more of that dust and grime. Super basic, super kind of just on the fly ways to give a little bit of detail back there, and I could definitely have gone in and added a edge detection sort of node, or the curvature node, to kind of get like the edges here a little bit dirtier, or even painted one inside a Substance or something, or Photoshop. But for a lot of stuff, this is kind of what I do, just to give like visual breakup to something that should, you could leave it totally just clear, but I feel like this just adds like that like 2% in, so that it's a little bit more visually interesting and nudges a little bit closer to being photorealistic. Not exactly though, because what IOR are we even running? Okay, so that's like close to the right glass, but I didn't even check up the right value for this. You can, I forget what it's called, but it's a certain number where it's like if you have less of it, just the higher you go, the closer you get to like real glass dispersion. Yeah, so that's the glass, and then didn't really update anything else. I mean, I gave some, the rubber also has a little bit more work, but kind of the same exact thing as the glass. So we just pulled this guy over to its output. We take that down. Yeah. So it's actually like a lot of dirt happening there for the mask. But if we go to something like this guy, yeah, so it's similar concept, dirt material, normal rubber material, they both get bump, and then the output is, a little dirtier tire. Not even close to the way you should actually texture a real tire, but close enough for this very stylized version of it. Then did a little bit of chrome and metal tweaks here and there, but the biggest update to this whole thing, as you can tell, is that our car is not chrome like it was inside the Octane render. It's now this like champagne color, and this was just kind of happened to be at the same time that friend Raid Zero released this Redshift auto shaders pack, which you can grab for $20 on his Gumroad, and it comes with a ton of shaders. So there's 22 car paint shaders, and he actually built like a real setup. I didn't do anything in here. I just literally pulled this champagne one in and threw it on, and it worked. I might have adjusted like some UV stuff to make sure it worked on mine, but I don't think it did. But he has a ton of proper nodes going into everything and using noises, so it's like procedural. And I had, yeah. So this is a zoomed in crop of the render, and you get these super nice like car paint flecks everywhere, but with like a nice coat on top of it for the reflections. And that was a big update to kind of selling the car, was having this like proper shader. And he was kind enough to give it to me for free, so to try out in my render. And so disclaimer there, I did get this free to use for this project, but I've tested out a bunch of them, and I would highly recommend them if you're into testing out doing some auto renders, or just have always kind of wanted to see how someone would set this up. I would for sure definitely download it. So let's turn these guys back on. Yeah, so you can see that like nice hot light right there. And I mean, overall it looked pretty bright in that other view when we had all the lights on, but this was pretty close to the idea of a car paint that I had when I was doing the Octane render. So those are all the texturing updates. Just a couple passes with like one, I think I used the same wipe mask on like the tires for dirt and the windows for dirt, and just overall color. I wanted some of the areas to be super reflective and clean, so I didn't go too heavy on adding dirt there. And then because I wanted the taillights to still interact with the environment, they also got lights on them. And these are just chrome, and I just took some area lights, dropped them in there. Super tiny, so 8 and 10. But really quick, I mean, I don't know why you would do this because you can't see it from this view, but you could do the same trick of taking this guy, taking it up to these guys, so these guys can input it there, maybe change it to be a sphere. Whoa. Oh, it's because our Z is set to the default. It's like, that looks crazy. Then we can do temperature and color. I do this a lot when my image has one thing and I don't want it to just run off that. We can start to add in a lot more of this red. Not exactly red enough, but that's fine. Then we could add in, intensity. And this one is set to add to the volume, so if we add a Redshift environment now, we should see that. Whoa! Whoa, that is so bright. I'm gonna turn these guys down. It's so bright. Maybe we just need to turn down the overall environment to something way less. Okay. Oh, it's those guys. They are what are contributing too much. Okay, I was like, yeah, that seems very odd that. Okay. There we go. Then we want it to be smaller. Yeah. pretty crazy looking. It's weird that it's not doing anything right there. That's doesn't make much sense at all. If we put this back to a rectangle, I wonder what it does. Okay. Rectangle it is. Rectangle, not visible. And that will give us decent fall off. I mean, come on, Redshift. So interesting with so little effort. And then if you're kind of still thinking like, oh man, I really like this area light, but I kind of want that control of the spotlight, but you don't really want to change it to anything, you can just bring down your spread, and that will kind of help focus it. And that will give you a lot more. Whoa, what is that? Why is that so weird? Okay. I guess there's some issues with that. Weird. But yeah, you can really close the spread of it. Have a crazy spotlight shooting out of the back of this thing. Cool. But that is not what I did for these guys. I'm gonna take them in to be just color again. Get rid of that. Bring them back to 8 and 10. Make them rectangles again. Yeah. So those are the and then you can see from this angle, it just casts kind of a nice like silhouette. That's the only reason that I let them contribute to the environment, was because they add this super nice cast. And then if we add these guys back in, they're going to be way too powerful. But if we go in and take down just a smidge, take this one down. And so this is something I really like about Redshift, is that like you can kind of really fast just kind of paint like you would like in Photoshop, just like values, and it gets pretty clean pretty fast. You don't really have to like squint to see what the details are going to be inside of all of this. You can really get it pretty fast. And if we add in our IS light for the front, you can see all these guys going pretty crazy. And then just turn on the instance, and they're going to carry all over all those lights, and then wow, this is overblown in every area. But that's just because we're using the wrong environment. But yeah, so that's everything as far as the changes from Octane to Redshift. There's quite a few. And for this one, because it was an animation, I'm just going to go over really quick the comping process that I went through. So I didn't render any passes, no multi-passes, no AOVs. I did all of the depth of field that like goes out of focus inside of Redshift. And that's just all in this camera here. I turned it off, but we can turn it back on. So it starts in focus. It slowly gets out of focus. I just cut the aspect ratio to be a little bit more simulating an anamorphic lens, so with that like oval bokeh. And then someone was asking previously about the custom bokeh image, and I've definitely done this more and more. It can shift colors and the brightness of your image, but I'm just going to get rid of this. I'm going to pull up a from an asset. So I keep them kind of in a like Redshift folder for just custom bokehs. And I've found a couple that are like, this is the image that would go in, but as an EXR. And so they give you like a little bit of color fringing on the edge, and it's not a perfect oval. So I'm gonna load one of these up. I load that in like that, that will not work. I'm just gonna copy this path, paste it like that. We're gonna go there. Yeah, so that one looks fine. Whoa, that's not what we wanted. This is a distortion map, which are also very cool, but not what we wanted. Oh, that's because I pulled it, yeah. There we go. So you can see, I'll let it kind of solve itself a little bit, but I'll do a picture viewer. And then turn it off. Let it go for a little bit. Couple seconds. Picture viewer that. A, B. So there's a slight color difference. I don't know if it's going to come over in the compressed live stream, but okay, you can kind of see it right there. So you can see in these highlights in our before, they're totally white, but in the after, and you can see it in the wheel here too, there's that color shift in everything that's kind of out of focus. It's just a super nice detail. It takes a little bit longer to clean up in a render, but it's just a super nice little kind of detail. It's different than chromatic aberration that people get wrong constantly, but it adds just that splash of not digital. It is digital, but not digital to the eye in those areas. But it can change depending on which image you load in. It can change like the hue or the overall tone of your image just based on what colors it's shifting around in the out of focus areas, and how dark it is in the center versus bright on the edges can kind of mess with your exposure. And I know that ACES is a big thing now. I mean, it was big back then. It was around back then. But the support for it is definitely growing. So if I were to do this again, I would probably try to do it in that workflow just to test it out. But I didn't for this. For this one, bokeh is like the only thing that's on. There's nothing else. I didn't use the exposure, which I do like using now. This was my first time kind of with Redshift when I made this. No flare, no streak, no nothing, no color controls, no tone mapping or LUT, no tone mapping, didn't do any of it. Just a pure render. And so we'll jump into the After Effects scene for that. So I'm gonna close this guy, close this scene, close this demo scene, get these guys down, and we'll jump into here. So I composited this all in After Effects, just, I mean, trying to get more into Nuke, but at the time this was, this is what I mainly composite stuff in, and it's not too crazy. So this is our raw render, and this is all the little details that were in our smoke sim that was up-resed. And kind of the cheat of this one is that this was rendered just Control K at 1280 by 540, because I knew that it was a personal piece and I knew it was going on Vimeo and just like socials, and then I didn't feel the need to put it in 4K or anything, and so I just used After Effects default detail preserve upscale by 150. And a lot of the times, if you're like comping grain and stuff on top of it, you can really get away with it. I mean, no one's, to me said that like, wow, that looks like kind of pixelated or like kind of, a little bit blurry. So if you can, I would definitely recommend it. You can kind of see that all of this stuff is super clean, but the IES section of the fall off, like I was saying, is super grainy just in that one section. Everything else out here, same level of grain. Right in there, crazy grain. But oh well, that's just a frustration I have with. I mean, it makes sense. There's a lot of information. I just don't get why it's so crazy overblown. And I mean, it's really cool that when like the smoke hits that light, because the IS is sitting there and it's not just a textured image, it like blows out that section. Same when like a little bit more floats in front of that one, it gets like super hot. I thought that was a nice little detail that made it look a lot more like a super bright light, and sold the kind of less of like a 2D comped volume on top of it. It like felt very like volumetric and 3D because it was. Cool. Yeah, so that's a little dirty secret about this guy, is that he is secretly upscaled by 150%, and no one has told me that it looks bad. So this is the base. I added the bars in, just to make it, correct to that anamorphic perspective, and that's kind of why I did that squeeze in the bokeh, was because I was framing it to more of like a 2:1 sort of ratio, and so I figured I would make the bokeh match. Definitely don't need to. First thing is a little tiny glow pass. I left it off the camera. I know that they have a bloom on there, but I tend to keep it off if I can, especially for Redshift. For Octane, I keep a little bit on just because I really like their algorithm of their bloom, but Redshift I don't really. And for this one, I didn't have, so just Control-Alt-Y, just bring up another one. And then I love this effects console from Video Copilot. Allows you to map like Control Spacebar, like you would search like on a Mac if you're used to that. Then you can search the whole effects console. I can't work without it now. I like beg studios to install it when I worked like in studio if they didn't have it, because it's just so much easier. So now I have Deep Glow, and I really like Deep Glow. It's inverse square fall off is really great. So if I were to redo this now, I definitely would probably use Deep Glow, just because I really like the way that it feels more like Octane's algorithm of blooming. It's just is really nice. But if you do not want to spend money, I just did these sapphire glows. I guess that's still spending money, but you can do the same exact technique with After Effects' default glow, just stacking up different kind of rings. And so this one's like a super tight glow, just in the brighter areas. Then there's an overall glow that just increases the radius, and then a more overall glow. And so the difference between that is that the threshold is super high, just to catch the big highlights there, and the radius is super low. And then as the radius gets bigger, the threshold drops down so that you're incorporating more of the image, and that's like a way to cheat a more sophisticated bloom in your images if you don't have a cool plugin like Deep Glow. But if you do have Deep Glow, just do that and it works way better, and you don't have to stack so many layers. So normally I would do a base glow and then a couple effects on top, and then a master glow on top to smush them all together, which is why I tend to render my stuff pretty dark, is because I know that I'm going to be stacking those sort of things on top of them. And I don't want to get it way too bright, and then I'll do a levels back on top normally. So then on top of that, this is where I think the most amount of copying went in was because it got 4 headlights on each car. All these headlights are optical flares. Yeah, so there are 8 of these optical flares. They're all the same. In hindsight, I could have put a null inside of that scene. These are also built in an older version, Cinema. But I could have put a null where all of these guys are. So just a fun little thing is if you hold shift, click, it will make it a child of anything that you're selected on, which is really nice because it will also 0, 0 out under that. And if you control click, it so if we control click that, or is it alt click? Yeah, alt click will put it as the parent of that object. But shift click to put all those nulls right where our lights are. And because I don't like using converter plugins or anything to After Effects, I just put on the render tag, not a compositing tag, an external compositing tag. And then I would just put those there. Make it a solid, make it a square. I would just do that, and then, you know, typical save After Effects, load in the Cinema 4D file into here, and then all those nulls would be there, and you could link them up to drive the optical flare. But I did not do that. If you hit U, you can see all the keyframes on a layer. I keyframed them. There was such little movement that once I decided I wanted optical flares on top, I was like, I'll just keyframe them really quick. So I keyframed all of these, and it's a pretty drastic change. I liked what was happening here, but I felt like because I didn't do anything in camera in Redshift, that I just needed them to kind of be more blown out, and then add in just a little bit of like a lens effect. This little tiny guy, super small, just something tiny. I think I pulled this from like a sun preset that they had, just to give a little bit of visual breakup inside there, so there was something kind of making it feel a little bit more like dynamic lighting. And then you can see this big arch up here of RGB, just makes it kind of smush it all together. And then another pass of glow on top of that, super subtle. I don't even think the opacity is very high on that. Oh, it's all the way up. Weird. So I must have just brought down the brightness of all of these by a ton. Then a chromatic aberration pass, which also does like a slight lens distortion. I do that for a lot of stuff. I don't know if it's super noticeable. Oh snap, going to grab deep glow right now. No, yeah, definitely. It is, I think it's like $20 or something, but saves so much time. It can also take in a mask input, which is super helpful if you render out like your emission and refraction pass out of Redshift. You can port those in just as a pass, run deep glow over it, and then you can comp just on top of your emissive materials instead of having to mess with the threshold at all. I do it all the time. It's super helpful. So there's chromatic aberration right before it. I put a transform just because the edges were getting bent in. So just a slight, 101 scale up. Throw on some nice grain. So before that, I just use grained footage that I've had for years and years and years. It's G30 dirty. And then here's the color correction. So it's just getting too washed out with all of those optical flares and glows. So I just want to do a quick crunch down and contrast. So if we go piece by piece, this is the first little chunk of it, and I just wanted to get it back to kind of green. I feel like green matched a little bit better because I turned these from being super red and like magenta in the scene. I wanted to go the other way with it, so I made these like a little bit more orange and green overall, just with the white balance. And then a LUT. I used LUTs with dropped intensity a lot just to get like an interesting contrast punch from them. But at 100%, that's really high. 100% was like unusable, and I would never ever use it. But I mean, drop down. Definitely gets that. Like it kind of balanced out that I went too green in the white balance, and gave like some nice, interesting contrast throughout the image. And then I decided that it went too much that way, and so I brought back, you know, some of the reds and some green in the shadows, and kind of pulled it out from being too contrasty, and kind of softened a lot of that because I felt like the punch of black next to it in the frame really made it feel more filmic. None of these are, I mean, I'm not a colorist, so none of these are the like real good ways to color your animations. I mean, I use LUTs a lot. I don't even know where I got this LUT because I renamed them in this weird naming convention. So this is Cinema, and then it was sort of Cooler. So I'll pull these guys off so we can actually see. So I mean, from that, it was a little bit cooler. The contrast is a lot. The saturation gets pulled down, and the exposure gets pulled down. Those are kind of what those notes tell me, and that's kind of how I mark up all my LUTs. I don't remember who taught me that. I think it was Visco for Lightroom. Had a sort of similar naming convention. So at a glance, you could tell what the LUT was going to do. And I've just carried it over to any new LUT pack I get. I rename them all. So I don't really know where I got this one from. But there are LUTs everywhere. There are too many LUTs everywhere. LUT packs for days. But yeah, I would never use a LUT at 100% unless it's like something you've custom made. It's just, yeah, you need to tweak your stuff to get a tone that like looks proper to what you rendered. So this is just punching it all back in. And then these are just black bars. I know there are better ways to make black bars, but I just put solids squeezed equidistant apart. Yeah, so that is the whole comp. Oh, there's one more thing, is I always throw in just a legacy Gaussian blur on my renders. More my personal ones. I try not to do it unless they ask for it on client stuff because you want those to be crisp. But just blurring those guys out. It's actually looking like it's really adjusting a lot of the glowing. So this is without, with on, without. It's interesting that it's, yeah, without it on. I kind of like that glow, but I just like to do it so that that's just so crisp, like that edge. I would just rather smooth it out. I went pretty aggressive with this one too because I knew that I upscaled it and that I rendered at low samples. So like all in there, just smoothed it out a tad, just so that all my edges felt soft. Yeah. So up here, all that just looks like way too much like a 3D model to me. And so when I do that, it's a blurry 3D model, but I mean, like, this camera has movement and everything to it. Like, there's no way you're gonna get a crisp image just out of the box. And so from back here, where 50% of people the majority percent of people probably are going to be viewing it, I feel like it helps. If you're going for like a still or something, obviously, don't blur your images. And that's it. Yeah, wow. This stream went much longer than I thought it was going to go. I went for, was it 2.5? That's good though. I feel like it's a good amount of time for a stream. Held almost 9 people the whole time, so either people said it and walked away, or it was interesting enough to stick around for. Thanks for sharing all this. Yeah, for sure. I feel weird saying that I'm like teaching anything, and definitely take all this with a grain of salt. I'm sure there's definitely stuff I said wrong, but I feel like it's better to share workflows with people, so that we all can make better work. And I've definitely learned from the internet, so in the stuff that I can share, the little tidbits that I've found, just thought I would post them up here. Maybe other people will be like thinking about how they can incorporate into their stuff. These files, either tomorrow or the next day, will be up on my site. The link of it is in my about, but it will be up on live streams. So I'm posting the YouTube recordings of the streams up here as well, if you want to go into an archive, because after 14 days they're deleted from the VOD here on Twitch. So this was the Software Bible doc from last stream, which I will be updating as, I mean, I've updated it for about like 2 years now since I created it, full of links and like little descriptions, so you can just kind of Control F, look for like Pyro, and you'd be like, cool, there are 14 links in here about Pyro. Most of it I would say is Houdini. That's what I started it for. And then Cinema, some nice stuff, probably outdated. I don't know how old that stuff is. ZBrush, Nuke, Learnings, Links, Unreal, Moi, Substance Designer. I tried to have most of them be free because, I mean, when I was making it for myself, I didn't want to have to just like have a ton of links to paid courses, but some of them are paid courses, and it just says at the time of me pulling the link what the dollar amount was to each one of them. But if we go back, so this was last stream, so I'll have mine edited and up here for on YouTube. So if you want, go subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's where I've been putting different cuts, and so this is the full hour and a half. But let's pause that. I've also done a 17-minute cut down of like the most necessary stuff. For today's, I feel like we had a pretty good flow, so probably won't have another cut down version because that's, you know, there's not much to cut down from this one, so it will probably be in its entirety like a 2.5 hour thing. But yeah, that's where they'll all be posted if you need to go look for them, and the link for that is in my Twitch, in my about page. Oh, don't want to watch myself live. Yeah, right here, live stream files. And then I put up, people are asking for PC specs. I put up a doc to that as well, with prices were when I bought them, but this is my machine and the GPUs that I'm running, all the different storage stuff. But okay, I think that is it, unless anyone has any more last minute questions. That is everything that I had to cover. Going once, going twice. Okay, I think we're all good. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. Don't forget to follow if you haven't. That will notify you when I go live. Oh, it looks like I missed a follow there from Lord Valkenheim. Valkenheim? That sounds right. Thanks for the follow 14 minutes ago. I'm sorry I missed that. But yeah, follow me on here, follow me on YouTube, follow me on Instagram. Links to all of that is if you, with Nightbot, if you do !, and then socials. Let me actually type in the chat. Yeah, so Nightbot will pull up all of those links for you. But yeah, thanks again for stopping by, and I will see you next time.